Welcome back to the channel, guys. Donnie D back at you. Hopefully you're doing well. So today we're going to talk about how I like to waterproof the base of my showers. I do this method for the most part on every shower. So I'm going to explain to you and go through some clips here how I like to do it. Let's get started. So first step I like to do before I even do anything you see me do here is make sure that my mortar bed is clean. I'll usually go around with a little brush or a vacuum, get any residual mortar that's on the base there, any sand or any out of the way. Then I'll wipe it down with a sponge and make sure that it's nice and clean. Once I'm through that, then I like to do my banding around the perimeter first. Now, one step I do, a lot of guys don't, is I'll actually 45 like a miter cut on the corners where the banding meet, so leave a little bit of a gap so I have a little bit of play where they meet. It doesn't have to be perfectly tight. And what this allows that the build up there is pretty even versus if you just went square to square. So the build up is more precise, you could say, and flat and smooth. So that's how I like to do it. I like to do all the banding around the whole perimeter first. Sometimes I use banding on every side, every wall. Sometimes I'll take the base, the sheet that I use on the whole base, and I wrap it up the walls. It really depends on the situation, the size tile, the size of the shower, and all that. So once I get all my banding done, I like to cut the piece of the sheet membrane. I either do this before or after, but without the banding in the way. So I like to pre-cut it. Pre-cut everything, the whole perimeter of it, and where it meets the drain there. I have a little template, like a circle piece, that I marked the edges of the sheet membrane here. I guess I'm better footage for you guys in video how I do that, but sometimes I like to wrap over the curb. I'll do one inside band and wrap the whole thing over. It just really just depends on the situation. So this one, the shower is pretty big, so I use 2 sheets there on it, as you could see there. Now when you go around with the sheet membrane on the base, you don't have to have it perfectly tight to the perimeter, because you're using a 2.5 inch band, well, a 5 inch band, so you have 2.5 inches up the wall and down on the floor, so you have about a 1/2 inch play to still get your 2 inch overlap. Now I've done it as low as like 1 inch to 1.5 inch overlap and never had a leak. But ideally you want to try to get it to 2 most of the time. But I always leave at least a 1/2 inch or so or more around the perimeter to give myself some play. Because what I like to do is I'll show you the next step here. But basically I'm going around marking anywhere on the edges here I need to trim, because you really want to get this piece accurate as possible. So when you go to set it and you got mortar all over the place, you're not making a mess, and you get this done clean and efficiently. So once I have everything completely pre-cut for the base of the shower, I'm talking all my banding, all my large sheet for everything in the entire shower, I like to start setting it, and I like to work my way out. You don't want to put this membrane down and then you're walking out, you're kneeling on it, because even though this thin set and you're screeding out pretty flat, you are going to evacuate mortar if you put a lot of pinpoint pressure, point load on areas. So you don't want to have to get on if you don't have to. You have to. Sometimes I'll take like a piece of foam board like this and put it on it, but even then sometimes that creates issues. So ideally you don't want to have to get back on it with a lot of weight if you don't have to. So here I am going around with my sponge, wetting down my mortar bed, getting it damp, so that way it doesn't pull out all the moisture out of my mortar as I'm working with it. Because if you don't do this, you can really literally trowel it out, and within 5 seconds it could be tacked over. So you don't want to have that issue. So when I'm doing showers like this, I always like to do all my perimeter first. Obviously you want to key it in. Some guys don't take, well, most guys don't take that step. But the keying in just means using a flat sided trowel, getting everything pressed in nicely, and then using the notch eye. This is not something that's going to make or break the install, but it makes for way excuse me, a way better install that's going to last even longer. You're going to get better coverage. Everything is just going to work that much better. So key it in first, trowel it out. I'll go around the whole perimeter. I like to use a Curdy trowel, which is 1/8 by 1/8 square notch trowel. And then I use a drywall taping knife most of the time, especially on the corners, because you don't have to worry about poking them too much. You're holding the knife pretty flat. So 8-inch taping knife, drywall taping knife. And then on the base, I'll use the same knife, and as I'm doing that, sometimes I'll switch to a plastic one. It really depends. But first step, once the setting, is always the corners, is like I like to do. Any of the banding around the whole perimeter, I like to do that stuff. Basically, I don't want to get in there again. Like, I'll do my back one like I'm doing here. I'll do my left, my right one, and then I'll do the whole sheet. And then if I have to do another piece of banding on the curb area there, I'll do that after. So that way I'm working my way out. Okay, once I get all of my banding where I can reach in those areas, I do the corners as well as I'm in that area. I basically like to work in an area, get everything as complete as much as possible, and work my way out while I am there. Now I'm ready to put down the large sheet membrane here that's going to cover the whole base here up to the walls. Again, wiping down my substrate here, which is a mortar bed, making sure it's dry and clean, and giving it a little bit of a drink of water here so the thin set isn't completely sucked up by the mortar bed and creating a weaker bond or potentially no bond. So I'm going to spread it out, keying it in, trowel it out, and then applying the sheet membrane. Okay, once you got your mortar troweled out nicely with no voids and no clumps, see how I roll it up there? I lay it against the wall so I could just pretty much unroll it. Now before I press down on anything here, watch as I unroll it here, I'm going to make any adjustments because once you press it in there, it's hard to get bubbles out and whatnot. So in this one section here, I'm going to have to peel it up on the right, I believe. That way I could just basically let it roll back out, and it just keeps itself flat. If you try to force it, you're going to get bubbles in areas that you're going to get air pockets. So as you can see how I'm doing this, so letting it roll itself to where it wants to go. Once I have it where I want it, I'm going to start troweling this thing out. Now I have it where I want it. Now this is a flow effect string, one of the square ones, so I decided not to pre-cut the drain hole. I just cut it out with my knife. So right now I always like to start from the center out, where any sheet membrane, when you're putting it on walls or floors or a shower base like this. So you take from the center out and you push it all the way to the perimeter, and this really allows for no bubbles or very minimal. Now after all these years that I do this, yes, do I still get voids and bubbles here and there? Yeah, it still happens, but you want to avoid them as much as possible. In worst case scenario, you come back the next day, you cut it out, and you put a patch. So it isn't a game changer, deal breaker situation, but you don't want to have to do that if you don't have to. So once I get the whole thing screwed out with my drywall knife, I'm going nice and slow. I'm not pressing too hard, just firmly. And I'm going to take my hands and just feel around for any clumps or anything like that, because when you use a trowel, you'll feel a little bit, but once you feel with your hands, you'll feel every little change in the substrate with your hands more so. So just basically check your work as you go. Try to eliminate or minimize any voids or bubbles in the membranes as you do it here. Now one method I like to do in most situations here, because I like to build my curbs out of wood. You can use foam and all that all works too, but I like to use wood to get it nice and level and whatnot. So how I like to do it here, it's a really important step. Now you always want to make sure your horizontal surfaces are pitched, especially the curb, since it's so low. It's going to see a lot of water. You always want to make sure it's pitched somewhat towards the drain of the shower, so into the shower. So I aim for about an 1/8 inch or so. That's industry standards. It's no more or no less. It's right at the standard for this size curb. So one thing I like to do in order to achieve that without having to mess with everything above this, with the tile, like adding mortar, adjusting this, adjusting that, start off with your curb being dead level, okay? Then I'll put my foam piece on the inside, make sure it's flush with the inside of the curb. But the foam piece that's on the outside of the curb, I'll make it about an 1/8 inch or so higher. And once I do that, we're going to have a void in there, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take mortar. I'll mortar the top of the curb and the back of the foam top cap piece here. So everything is completely supported. And then I fasten it down and cover with the sheet membrane. And once I have that curb all done, fastened up, I have my curb piece. As you can see here, I got it labeled. I got lines on it. It's all pre-folded. Now this makes a huge difference to keep it nice and crisp and tight corners. This is not something you have to do. It's just an extra detail that does help for a really nice install. So I'm basically doing this whole curb here. There's no banding on the inside. This whole curb piece goes all the way over the curb on the top, down, and all the way over onto the shower base. So getting all my proper overlaps and whatnot. So that's how I usually like to do the sheet membranes here. That's how it goes. So basically at this point, once this dries in about 24 hours, this is ready for a flood test. But wait, I take it to one step on most projects. Check this out. This is actually good and ready for tile, but I like to take a step further, and I call it, Donnie, these bulletproofing showers. So I'm going to do 2 coats of Hydroban, which is a liquid waterproofing membrane, just on the seams of the sheet membrane, so we don't ever have any wicking, just to give it insurance. Doesn't hurt to do. You don't want to encapsulate the whole thing with the liquid, because you have 2 different membranes here. They breathe differently. So I'm just going to do all the seams of the sheet membrane. Then I'm going to do about 2 coats of Hydroban to about here, and then 2 coats on the vertical corners, and then just 1 coat everywhere else. 2 coats around any horizontal surfaces, then go around the bench 2 coats. But once you get about up to here, 3 feet, it really isn't going to affect anything. Everything's already waterproof. I'm just going to put a coat on anywhere that the sealant, that way you just have a better bond, because the thin set does stick to the sealant, but doesn't stick as well as it does to a liquid membrane. So giving it 1 coat just really gives a better bond with the mortar. So I'm going to check around and make sure everything's completely watertight. Now once we have 2 coats of the liquid on there, as you can see all that green that's on there, this shower is actually able to use a shower head, but basically what we want to do is plug the drain. Different types of plugs. I have an air plug here, is the one that fitted the best. Most times I use a 2-inch plug that you tighten down with like a wing nut. Basically I'm going to fill up this shower pretty high, almost the height of the curb, is just a little bit less than that, and then we're going to let it sit for about 12 to 24 hours to make sure we do not have any leaks, because if we do, it's a lot easier to fix it now versus when all this thing is completely done. Tile is done, shower door is done, everything's done. It's a big ordeal after the fact. Once we got this whole shower filled up, what we want to do is we want to wait on site for at least half hour or so. Let the water settle. Then I like to mark a line on the wall there where the flood excuse me, the flood test is, where I want the water to be when I come back the next day, so we know that that's our gauge. And we also want to wait around once we fill this up for a little while, because sometimes if the drain isn't tight, it can give us a false reading that there's water going down somewhere. So give it some time, mark a line, and then you let it sit. Let it sit. Did the flood test. I have a balloon in there because a mechanical plug doesn't fit, so I actually had to borrow this from my plumber. I'll probably get one at some point, but put it in there, pumped it up, mark some lines over there and over there. And as you can see, we're exactly on those lines. Nothing has moved at all, so flood test is passed. Now we commence the tile installation. There you go.